In a time of rising unrest, when borders dominate headlines and immigration policy shapes the future of our nation, the truth matters. From the front lines of law enforcement, national security, and public policy, this is Frontline Facts, where rhetoric is stripped away, where politics takes a back seat, and where facts, hard, documented facts, lead the conversation. As instability grows beyond our southern border, as communities feel the impact at home, we bring you informed voices. Attorneys, senior law enforcement leaders, policy experts, and professionals who understand the law, the protocols, and the consequences. This isn't opinion. This isn't spin. This is clarity in a time of confusion. This is Frontline Facts, and the conversation starts now.
Welcome to Frontline Facts with Louisa Deason. We are correcting the rhetoric on immigration issues and public policy. In today's episode, we explore the foundation and purpose of the bail bond companies and the industry itself. This is not the same rules today as we had maybe 10 or 15 years ago. That's why our special guest, Mario Gomez from First Advantage Bail Bonds, is here today to dive deep into the world and explain why changes have wreaked havoc on this particular industry. Mario, welcome to Frontline Facts. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you have a pretty impressive background. I noticed that you're a native Houstonian, which you're a rare breed. You don't find too many native Houstonians around in Houston any longer, but give me a little bit of your background and how you got started in this industry. You started fairly young.
I guess I'll take that. I felt older when I started, but I guess that was a pretty good age for me. I started when I was about 34. My background before bail, I was a paralegal, criminal and civil. I started in a lot of law firms. I started working in the mailroom in a first law firm when I was about 20. And I sort of jumped around, picked up a lot of jobs that were, by far mostly they were just like not well-paying jobs, but I learned a lot. In the course of that, I kind of realized that I wasn't really going to become an attorney or go to law school or anything. And I think I grew bored with the legal profession in the sense of where I was. So I decided to think about a second job, which I got into bail bonds at night. I worked for a bonding company downtown, and I was working as a paralegal during the day and worked at the bonding company at night. And I did that for about 3 years. And then in 2007, I got my own license to be an owner, to own my own bonding company. And I was about 34 years old when I got in as a bondsman in my own company. That's when the journey began for me.
Pretty interesting. I mean, obviously you were already working in a field that kind of led you in that direction. If you're working with law firms that, in civil, I know that immigration is very civil. All the cases normally are civil cases, and that there's a misconception about which judges have jurisdiction over those cases and not. So I'm sure that there's a lot of convolution in the industry that you're in. But let's go dive deep into, describe the most significant changes that you've maybe observed, and I say maybe the 5, 10, maybe 15 years. What legislative policies have shifted that are of great impact to your industry?
Well, the greatest impact in the last 10 years has been criminal justice and bail reform. As you've seen, it swept across the country, and it came to Harris County in the form of a federal lawsuit, O'Donnell versus Harris County. So that was the most significant change. Totally changed the industry. Public safety played into that, how it was affected. But yeah, the last 10 years has definitely been bail reform and criminal justice reform.
Well, and I remember the O'Donnell case, but go over a little bit of the background on it. It affected the way that criminals bonded out. Is that correct?
Correct. It was a federal lawsuit brought by a plaintiff, Miranda O'Donnell, who sued Harris County, basically alleging that the bail system was unconstitutional and that it basically held poor people in jail. It violated their constitutional rights. And to mind you, this lawsuit was filed directly to deal with misdemeanor bail, not felony bail. just misdemeanors, marijuana possession, DWIs, assault, theft,
What's
anything that
meant
was
for murder and rapists and drug trafficking and alien smuggling and all the other stuff that goes along.
right. All that stuff was supposed to be exempt, but that was kind of the irony and the hypocrisy of what O'Donnell actually did. But to get into the legal part of it, the narrative that bail was unconstitutional and that poor people were being held actually was overturned or didn't hold up legally with rulings from the Fifth Circuit, which basically held that defendants don't have a right to be free from a wealth-based detention system, meaning basically they don't have a right to affordable bail. What they do have a right to, which is what O'Donnell established and the Fifth Circuit established, was that defendants only have a right to have a hearing to plead their case of indigency, being poor, and the judge is supposed to weigh what they've done, their criminal history, and use indigency or being poor as a factor, but not the sole factor in releasing them, which is what O'Donnell did because bail reformers ran right out and said, oh, bail's been ruled unconstitutional, and bail schedules, by the way, which was not true. But of course, they ran with that and they started releasing people left and right who were repeat offenders. And also, they used the O'Donnell settlement, which was a consent decree between Harris County and the judges, but they used it to release felons as well. While there was no court order to do it, it was just something they extended into. So that was also a violation and an abuse of O'Donnell. So while they did let misdemeanors out, they extended it to felons, which caused a lot of problems with public safety in our county.
Well, and when we're talking about communities and public safety, that's one of the things that I've been very zoned into. Explain, I mean, you're not new to the table. You obviously know your business, but I understand you were also elected as the president of the Professional Bondsmen of Harris Counties Association back in 2019 and was elected to the Harris County Bail Bond Board of 2022. So you have experience, and it sounds to me like you know your business very, very well. How can some of these, how is the movement for bail reform, or has there been any suggestions to bail reform? How have you been able to, or have you been able to be in a position to make recommendations to reform? And if so, what would your recommendations be?
Well, that's been the problem. It's been an uphill battle because the bonding industry has been attacked to be so that they can discredit us, so that when we try to get a seat at that table, they don't want us at that table. They don't want to hear from us. And the simple argument is, well, you guys make money off the people, so therefore you're going to defend your position because you make money. And so we're not usually included in the conversation. So I've had to take more of a public approach, media, getting interviewed on the news, giving data. My sole strategy is to bring truth and light to the issue because unfortunately, there's a lot of deceptive, the narrative is deceptive in that there's a lot of cooking of the facts and the data so that it seems as though it's working, even though we have seen crime explode here in Harris County. And yet, the people that are elected in our county consistently tell us that crime is going down.
Well, and we all know that's not correct.
Right. So, because I can't be included in the conversation, I've gone to the public. As you well have seen me in different rooms speaking, I speak about the data. Like, for instance, Harris County is currently releasing between 3,500 and 4,000 people a month on free bail. About 1,000 to 1,200 of those people are felons. The rest of them are misdemeanors. And mind you, in that cycle are a lot of repeat offenders that bail reformers and criminal justice people will not admit or won't, so they hide a lot of those facts, which is all I do is bring it and let the public decide for themselves what they're willing to believe. And at this point, they're willing to believe a lot more than they were 5 years ago, simply because crime is that bad that it cannot be denied. They just don't understand how it got, where it came from and how we got here, because our current elected officials will tell us things like this started because of COVID, or this started because Hurricane Harvey. And while I believe those things were contributing factors, I think those things accelerated where we are already going because criminal justice reform started here in 17 and 18. So we were already on this kamikaze course to go where we were going. Those type of things that happened just sped up where we were going. So to answer your question is I'm not included in a lot of conversations where attacked. So I take it to the public, and that's my main strategy. And of course, using my titles as a subject expert to say that I understand what I'm talking about.
I mean, those numbers you've given are pretty staggering. And I know from my background, having worked for ICE, that, the numbers are staggering with how many people that are illegally here in this country are released. And they either bond out or they're given a no bond or they're just released. And the horror of that is, if you're not going to honor ICE detainers at the jails, the problem propels itself to release criminal aliens that have committed heinous crimes. We're talking about rapists, murderers, human traffickers, all kinds of really, really, pedophiles. But there must be some frustration, not just amongst yourself, but amongst the industry across the board. And what do you got? Do you ever collectively get together and talk about other bail bonds companies, how to resolve this or how you could have your voice heard to a higher level, and make people more aware? I know that grassroots efforts are tremendous, and that's basically where you start. So you're doing a great job. But any suggestions to what else can be done?
Well, as an association, we meet every month. So these strategies, as well as our state association, we had a lot of impact this last legislative session on a lot of the bail reform bills that came out of the Texas legislature, as well as the victims from Crime Stoppers and that sort of thing. So it was collective, but I do work with Crime Stoppers victims because I created a nonprofit called Take Back Our City that deals with victims of murder and violent crime. Um, but I wasn't well received when I started going to those meetings. I've been going for about 4 years to Crime Stoppers meetings, and because I felt that the victims were probably our best strategy to bring to light what's going on with average everyday people and where this was coming from. To give you some context, bail bondsmen, when we were doing bail and making money, obviously a lot of it, but we were also safer because there was a balance. What you see that gets caught up in the bail reform, it's not just free bail. You talked about the rapists and the immigrants and all the things that are going on with that. But what's in there in the mix that people don't notice is you have extremely low bail for people whose bail was otherwise higher for the rapist, for the sex trafficker. They're giving PR bonds to people who are obviously in the country undocumented or illegally, and yet they're giving them a PR bond, which really made no sense to me because I'm like, if they have an immigration detainer and you give them a free bond or a PR bond, they're just going to go to immigration and get deported and not face any justice for the crime they committed. So that's kind of all intertwined in what was going on with bail anyway. But yes, collaboratively, we were working together with our state association, which had an impact with the state legislators to get some of the legislation that was passed. So we did have that impact, but it's constantly an uphill battle when you have left leaning bail reform type people in the legislature as well, because we never know each legislation cycle what they're going to come up with to try to counteract what legislation has been passed.
Well, and what the left has done at an all-time level, not just local, but within the U.S., is just crazy. It's insanity to watch the allegations and the release of criminal aliens, and that they defend criminal aliens as opposed to, the normal citizen that's paying taxes. And it's a real burden on the safety of the communities, et cetera, et cetera. But let me ask you this. So let's walk through somebody doesn't understand the bail bonds process, how it starts. So it's a judge that determines the bond, and what are the parameters in which that requirement or that bond is set? There have to be certain margins within that decision that are made. What are those?
I mean, well, every judge is kind of a king or queen of their own little fiefdom, right?
Yes.
So they set bail how they see fit based on, you know, the details of the crime, their criminal history. Um, but what I did notice that when soft on crime type judges got elected, and I was sitting in the bail hearings, the common thing that changed that I was seeing that was that you saw judges ask the first question was, well, how much bail can they afford? Which I thought was odd considering that I don't think bail should be made set
Right.
so that a defendant can make it. I think it should be set on the crime and the criminal history, and then it's up to them to make bail, not, well, let me make bail low enough to make sure they make bail. That was very different approach to bail that I saw. But the criteria you certainly used to be, well, because the DA obviously in a bail hearing, the district attorney there will read out the details of the incident, and then the defense will make, whatever, details to say, hey, the guy's employed, has lived here his whole life, has children, whatnot, and the judge to make a determination saying, well, considering the details, I'm not going to give him a PR bond. And number two, it was a little bit of violence there, a little bit of, stalking or whatnot, or they were planning things. And there's a public safety issue. So therefore, I'm going to set bail a little bit significantly higher than I would. And plus put bail conditions, obviously, maybe a curfew, an ankle monitor, a protective order to stay away from the victim, that kind of thing. So there were all these different things that could be done and were part of that release. Because once they decided they were going to make bail with a bondsman, which is a surety, which is us,
Right. And there's no reason in the world why your company should not get paid. You're the one taking the risk.
exactly, we're 100% responsible for the face value of the bond when we're generally charging about 10%. But we do have a dynamic that's different than pretrial services in that we include family. We include a mother, a father, somebody that's coming to co-sign for that bond and also pay and say, we're going to be responsible with you, Mr. Bondsman, for 100% of that bond if our family member does not make his court appearances and absconds or runs away. So that was the beauty in that we could gauge, okay, mom, dad, do you work? Yes, we work. How long have you been on your job? Oh, been there, 20 years. Okay. How long have you lived in your home? Oh, we've been in our home, 15 years. Okay. So they're stable and they're generally going to keep the defendant in check because, it's them on the line as well.
Well,
So
it's
when
flight risk if they don't have those determinations in place.
absolutely. So in a lot of cases, we're dealing with average people that don't own a lot of things like collateral because there's always this misconception, we'll just get collateral for everything. Well, we're dealing with working class people that don't generally have collateral. Um, because of homestead exemption laws in our state, homestead property is not always the best property to take as collateral because we have a problem with the judgments and enforcing those judgments and things of that sort. So generally, we take people at their word, what we can read. They're generally stable people. They're law abiding. Maybe their family member is not, and they're in jail. So we don't know the family member. We've never met them. So we kind of go off of the family member that's before us, and we make a determination. But mind you, our our failure to appear rate as bondsmen is less than 10%, whereas the free bonds and the PR bond and all those have an 85 to 90% failure to appear rate.
Well, and that's what we face with immigration, for example. You hear you have an immigration hearing before an immigration court, and the people normally don't show up. And so it's kind of like, yeah, we can understand that completely. Now, let me go into How have movements for bail reform affected? I know that there's been efforts to eliminate cash bail or provide alternatives that have changed the landscape of the bail bonds business. What are your thoughts on these reforms? What do you think will be the worst, and what would be the best option?
So reform obviously had to come through loss and hardship. At some point, I realized that the only way this is going to change is when enough lives are lost, unfortunately. Because when I first started speaking to people 6 years ago, it was this whole people were stealing things out of necessity. Like they need milk, they need bread, they need eggs for their kids. That wasn't what was happening. You're talking highly organized retail theft.
Stealing Louis Vuittons and things of that nature. And it's like, wait a minute, where's the milk and the bread that you need for your family?
Right. And that's how it got sold to the public, which was to pull on their heartstrings and make them feel good about something that really was going to hurt them in the long run. So now that we're here 7 years later, the public is ready to hear more. What's astounding to me is that the current elected the elected officials and the candidates are still pushing poor people in jail. People are rotting in jail. People are losing their jobs because they cannot get out. So that it's like the narrative hasn't changed, um, which is surprising because they're still hoping to get elected on that. And I think the public is more fed up. They're more aware. Um, and that's the only thing I see that's different is the public has woken up. They don't believe it. They know crime is bad. I'm just informing them of where it came from, and the people that are still trying to sell them that narrative don't care about the balance between accountability and public safety.
Well, and you bring a valid point. I mean, we've seen a tremendous increase in crime in Harris County. I think the nation has seen an increase in crime. What really makes my stomach just turn is when I see sheriff's offices or police departments that don't want to cooperate with ICE. It's a very simple issue. You said it. I know you understand this, but I watched it when it worked because I was with the agency when we were doing that. And that was place an ICE detainer on someone who's a high risk and a potential flight risk, right? The worst of the worst don't get to bond out. They have a detainer, and it allows the agents that work within the parameter of the jail at the entry location to process them at a different area just to identify who they are through their own databases, and then be able to place an ICE detainer in case that person then decides to bond out. If that person bonds out, they go right into the custody of ICE, which means that person is then apprehended and detained in a secure location and identified in a secure location rather than having to be released. And then you have to take 8 to 10 agents to go out to the locations in the community, which now pose not only a greater risk for the ICE agents, but for the community and the people that were released, because he's most likely back with his compadres in an area where there's drugs and guns and money, and it's just a heightened awareness to more violence. And so how do you fix that? What are your recommendations? What is your perspective on that?
Well, one thing I noticed about and the ICE issue goes all the way back to Obama. Um, I remember that there were certainly a lot more ICE detainers when that all started, especially here in Texas, because a lot of that started with Governor Perry, um, when undocumented people or people that had overstayed visas and things, they could not renew their driver's license. So you had a lot more stops happening, and certainly a lot of people were deported. Without all the chaos of what's going on now, because a lot of detainers were placed. But what stayed consistent through everything is that I've never been able to determine the rhyme or reason for how somebody or someone doesn't get a detainer, because I've also bonded out people like, man, I can't believe they've been in jail a whole week and they still haven't gotten a hold. Um,
And that may be due in part with, like, for example, under the Biden administration, it was catch and release. Nobody was going to be detained. So those ICE beds were empty at those detention centers that were contracted out.
well,
Problem that I see today is just blatant ignorance, but it's just against ICE. What about other enforcement agencies? What about other state police departments that have maybe a murder suspect that is wanted and they hit a bolo, or they have intelligence that says, okay, he committed a crime or a murder in Houston. Can we transfer him over? There's communication between those two divisions, but why isn't there any communication or cooperation with police and ICE, or the sheriffs and ICE? And I'm not saying every division is doing that, but there has to be collaboration. I mean, it just keeps our community safer. It's common sense.
Well, if you look at people, like for instance, we have Sheriff Ed Gonzalez. So when the O'Donnell case was settled, and first it was voted on by Commissioner's Court. I was there to speak against it in July of 2019. So in October of 2019, it went before the federal judge. She had a hearing to sign off on it, but before she signed off on it, she had a hearing where everybody could speak. Well, Sheriff Gonzalez was at that hearing and sat in the witness stand and said that, releasing people on free bail would make our community more safe.
That's crazy.
So you have to look at who's in office, right? Who's our sheriff, and that's why you have this kickback on, well, we're not going to follow that, or we're not going to place detainers, or that's why I said I've never been able to determine their criteria for who gets one. It's almost like this one didn't, this one did, this one. Like I couldn't say, oh man, that type of case, oh yeah, that guy gets a hold. No, there's no. So when you look at who's in office and who's controlling the jail and who's enforcing that, it all falls along partisan lines.
Listen, we're going to have to cut over to a commercial break real quick because we do have sponsors we want to highlight. Thank you for waiting.
Are you tired of watching big corporations get richer while your family budget gets tighter? What if I told you that financial freedom does not always start with making more money? It can start with redirecting the money you are already spending. Welcome to The Shift. This movement is for families who care about faith, freedom, and where their dollars actually go. We talk about choosing USA-made, family-owned, non-toxic products that are better for your home and your health. No hype, no influencer culture, no complicated side hustles. Just real conversations about how to stop funding the giants who do not care about you and start supporting businesses that do. Laundry soap, toothpaste, dish soap, protein, essentials you already buy. What if those purchases could strengthen American manufacturing, support real families, and even create an extra stream of income for your household? This is not about shopping harder. It is about shopping smarter. If you believe your dollar is a vote, then it is time to use it with intention. Text the word SHIFT to 601-781-8686 and learn how to turn everyday spending into something that actually builds your home, your health, and your future. Text SHIFT to 601-781-8686.
Your home is one of your biggest investments, and protecting it should be simple, smart, and affordable. When choosing a home warranty, it's important to select a company with strength, stability, and experience. A national provider that has been in business for over 40 years gives you confidence that you're partnering with a trusted leader in home protection. First American Home Warranty helps protect your budget from unexpected repair or replacement costs on major home systems and appliances. Because when something breaks, it's never convenient, and it's rarely inexpensive. Home warranties aren't just for real estate transactions. While many plans are purchased through realtors and title companies, homeowners can purchase coverage directly at any time. There are no limits on the number of air conditioning units covered. We cover homes of any age. We cover both chlorine and saltwater pools. We offer flexible plan options, including add-ons like pool coverage, appliance plus, plumbing plus, and more. It's important to note, coverage does not include pre-existing conditions. We use our own qualified service technicians, and a simple claims process must be followed to ensure smooth service. When you choose First American Home Warranty, you're choosing a strong, dependable partner dedicated to protecting your home and your budget. To learn more and find the right plan for your home, contact Amy Carrolls at acarrolls@fahw.com. First American Home Warranty, your partner in home protection that offers peace of mind.
Well, we are back. I am Louisa Beeson. I am your host for Frontline Facts. We are correcting the rhetoric, and we're coming back to our guest today. Well, we return to Frontline Facts with our guest, Mario Garza. Mario, before we left on break, what we had talked about was a little bit about those ICE detainers and why it's so important with what the jails allow ICE agents to do and whether or not there's any collaboration. But you speak from experience. You've seen this before. You were getting people that were illegally here and you couldn't determine why they weren't asked or why there weren't holds on them. Go back into that piece of conversation as we left into the commercial break.
So over my time in bail, I could never determine what Harris County criteria was for placing a detainer. It was just sort of like a wait and see from our end, because I couldn't tell if it was a certain crime, if it was a certain criminal history, because some of these people had recycled through the system many times and hadn't gotten holds, which was also a way we determined our risk factor on bail. But what we did see that I did notice a pattern after criminal justice reforms and things took hold was that family members that would call my office and say that the person was undocumented. No, they're undocumented. They're illegal. They're here with no permission and have been. And but when we would look them up in the district clerk as a system, we would notice that their status was listed as a citizen, which I couldn't understand that. So I don't know if that was manipulation from the inside, from the sheriff's department, or what was going on there. But that happened several times, which I thought maybe it was a manipulation so that people didn't get flagged.
Well, I think a lot of them come into this country and they're kind of coached by their smugglers and their perpetrators to say certain things. So that doesn't surprise me. But, to not have the checks and balances is really alarming when you think about the hatred that people have towards ICE and DHS in general, but it's not against any other agency. It just makes common sense. It's common sense practices to anybody who wants to keep their community safe, to not release criminals back into the areas where they were picked up, because they go back to those areas. They reside in those areas. They commit crimes in those areas, and they put the people in those areas at high risk. Now, is there anything that you want to add to any kind of suggestions, or you and I spoke the other night when we met, and we talked a little bit about your concern with bounty hunters. Are bounty hunters being hired, and who are they being hired by that are bypassing the people that you have worked with in the industry you're in? What kind of a significant risk does that pose when it's not you guys or it's somebody else doing it?
Well, I think bounty hunters, and I dealt with them, and some are good and some are bad. Some are shady. Some lie about their credentials. You have to be careful because the state of Texas, you have to be a licensed PI to do fugitive recovery here. And many times I ran across people who just, I do freelance work. And it's like, there's no such thing. You're either licensed or you're not.
Well, the only ones that can determine and give out a PI license would be DPS. Is that correct? I mean, they really got very stringent about those rules about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's not everybody. It's you have to have the license issued by them to do the PI work.
Exactly. And in the beginning, you have to work for somebody before you can. I think you have to work for somebody under somebody for 3 years before you can get your own private license to start your own PI business. So um, that's dangerous in that they're not always well trained. Um, they botch jobs. They go to the wrong houses. Many bondsmen have been sued and put themselves in legal risk because they've hired the wrong bounty hunter. Um, there's one that went to jail here a few years ago for he was sex trafficking women.
Yikes.
Luis Rodriguez. I never liked the guy. I got a bad vibe from him from the first day I met him. But he was a little young guy, hyping himself wanting to be on TV. And I didn't like the guy's vibe. And through time, bondsmen were complaining that he's a liar, that he tells them he captured people when he didn't. So there was this, a lot of that TV thing played into a lot of what these guys want to be. And that you have to be careful with that because that's when abuses happen. So
Well, and to think that he's involved in sex trafficking, it's just that makes me sick to my stomach. Well, Houston is known as one of the Mecca
we're a hub.
area. We're a hub for it. We're the fourth
Sure.
largest city people get to once they cross the southern border, and the transportation mechanism to disperse them to the circuits of the prostitution rings that they're in.
Well, growing up here,
It's epic.
what was common, and then I saw a documentary on Houston, but a lot of those cantinas, those are after hours prostitution places.
Yes.
They
I
got
saw
secure.
a lot of those cases.
Yeah, they look like regular bars, but really there's a security guy, like a guard guy at the door, determining if you're undercover, and it's a whole labyrinth of rooms and things like that. But that's what it is. It's prostitution in plain sight, but it's trafficking. And
Trafficking, and then they get them to other states for different events, such as the Super
Sure.
Bowl, and I'm sure we'll have a huge problem with it with the soccer coming to the FIFA coming here and whatever else. But you're right. Those cantinas do pose a significant risk. We saw cases where Thai females were being smuggled in for the purpose of prostitution, and they were paying nearly $80,000 to get here by their perpetrators and their traffickers. And you think for a minute, there's no way those people could pay their way out. So they're in indentured servitude. These women were forced to sleep with at least 15 to 20 men a day without any medical assistance. That
Sure.
to me is just horrific and horrific conditions.
Sure. I mean, thank God for some of the laws that were federally passed where I know there was that big cantina here down on Telephone that got busted a few years back. And, when they confiscate all the property of these traffickers, they use that money to help these women seek their help, for counseling and things like that. So those are good laws. But unfortunately, on what you said about the indentured servitude, that that's because that's what they do. They say, "Oh, we'll bring you here, but now you got to pay us back," and then they charge them for the room where they stay. They charge them for the food, uh, and so that's all expenses that gets taken out of their daily what they're earning. So very little is going to the principal of what they.
Well, and what we saw were there tons and tons of massage brothels and places like that all throughout downtown and all up and down 1960 and all these other places. But the scary thing was there was always bars on the doors. There were always cameras all over the place. But these women were slaves in there. They were stuck there. They couldn't leave. And some of them were beaten. The conditions we found some of those women in were absolutely heartbreaking. And we also have to be careful with vetting who are the nonprofit organizations. Just like you said, you have to vet for the proper PI people that are doing the bounty work. You have to do the proper vetting to find out which organization that helps trafficked victims is legit and which ones are not. There are so many out there that are just perpetrating, making the problem worse because they recycle those women to other areas. I've seen it happen. I've heard it happen. I've reported them, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But yeah, these are horrific conditions.
Well, and also how many get busted and are open within a few weeks? I mean, it's going on in plain sight and cops are traveling up and down the streets and know that this is here. They know what it is. And yet the crackdown is more for the media soundbite to say, look at what we cracked down on. Yet they either open up, they change the LLC.
They move.
So,
They open
uh,
up under a different name. I mean, it's
right,
nuts.
right. These are all legal maneuvers to create these ways that they can open up again and be, well, we're just another company. But it's the same people. I saw that in legal. I saw like how people would just use the LLCs and then open up when they would bankrupt one and start another.
Well, now let me ask you this. Looking ahead, what do you envision for the future of the bail bonds industry? I mean, you're laying the groundwork to do education. I think that is incredibly important. People need to be educated on what your industry requires and how you work to get support to make those changes.
Well, what I've managed to do with the public is to let them know that we're not taxpayer funded. So when fugitives go on the run, that's our own money through bounty hunters. We do collaborate sometimes with law enforcement when we have a defendant who's in a location. We already know where he's at. We just call in for law enforcement to to do the arrest or to effectuate the arrest because it limits us on liability. So we're not doing anything that may cross the line. Law enforcement obviously has more authority to effectuate the arrest them, go in the house, whatever. So we provide a service, a good one. And that's kind of what the education process is to say, we're not your enemy. We don't arrest anybody. We don't set bail, but we do take all the risk. To answer your question is people are coming to a point where they're willing to listen, and I'm there with the message as I always have been. So that's my strategy is to try to even to reach the Democrats to say, look, your system isn't working. We're not saying that certain people like we didn't have a problem with first time offenders. If a first time offender wants to get a PR bond, but a true first time offender, not somebody that is just charged with a low level crime, but's got a repeat offense prior criminal history. We don't have a problem with that because what we know in the industry is that's not teaching anybody anything. So if you give a first time offender a free bond, they're more than likely going to be back.
Yes. There were
95% reoffense rate within 1 year. Within 6 months, it's 119%. Within 3 months, 90 days, it's 139 reoffense rate. So
wow. Those are pretty high numbers.
right, because they're recycling through, because that's the thing about the jail too. The jail is filling up because you can't push them out fast enough because they're coming in the back door too quick.
Wow. I mean, those numbers are staggering.
Yeah, I mean, again, that is my goal is to educate, to give you the numbers, to let you decide that it is not working. Let there be a balance. We're not saying lock everybody up and throw away the key, but what we are saying is that if they're going to be released on bail, we can monitor them better than you spend $100 million on pretrial services when that budget used to be $9 million before bail reform.
Now, and to talk about some of the offenses for first-time offenders, are the majority of those drug offenses or obviously not domestic violence and things of that? Those are big red flags. They're much, much more harsh crimes. But I think that this country needs to spend more time, or this city needs to spend more time with, providing some kind of rehab or education on alcohol and drug addiction and recuperating from that to kind of subside some of the arrests that are taking place.
Well, let's be honest. The PR bonds are across the whole spectrum, everything. We've seen a 34% increase in domestic violence homicides while it's going down everywhere else in the state. And yet they are releasing assault, domestic violence for $100, if not free. So even if you have to pay for bail, your family can go downtown and put $100 and you'll be released on $100 bond for domestic violence.
That's scary because we always know that we have a big, big gang problem in this city. And the problem is that the domestic violence victim is usually someone who's been at the hands of, say, MS-13, or, just somebody who's not a very good person. And to put a bond of $100 and then have them go back to that same situation where they beat their partner or their girlfriend or whoever it was, uh, poses a significant risk, because we have seen the patterns where most of those crimes increase in violence, and we've had cases we've seen where it's turned out and resulted in the murder of someone. Um, I know that the Biden administration eliminated the division that was placing some of those holds on ICE when they were in that catch and release kind of status. And we were horrified. I sat back as some of our friends worked for ICE, and they're like, I don't have a job. They dissolved my unit. And you're thinking, wait a minute, that is an incredibly important unit. And we have to all work in unison. Those are not the kinds of people we want released or bonding out.
Well, and also DWIs. We lead the nation in fatalities on DWIs, yet those people are getting released for $100 as well.
That makes me sick to my stomach.
Right. So when you look at, let's just look at the pattern. You got soft on crime sheriffs, you got soft on crime BAs like we got here. You got scattered through the judiciary, soft on crime judges. So when you got all that working together, bail bondsmen don't have a chance, nor does the public. Let's just forget about the bondsmen, because when we're safe, bondsmen are doing okay anyway. Like I said, 10 years ago, we made more money and we didn't have the crime problem
That's great.
because the bonds were higher, and we took those risks because judges got upset and said, hey, you've already been through the system. Now you're coming back with a more violent crime. You know what? We're going to make your bond significantly higher this time. Well, that means the family's got to come up with that. But we also monitor them. They check in once a week, and we get issues with them. Judges used to be like, hey, where's this defendant? Where's he at? We want to see him in court. So they call the bonding company, and we could get the defendant or the family on the phone and say, hey, judge wants to see him tomorrow, so he needs to be there. Judge got a bone to pick with that defendant. We could locate him. We could find him. We worked in collaboration. It was a partnership, if you will, between the criminal justice system and the bondsman, and it worked.
And that's not happening today.
No, when they cut us out, and that's everything they did. Everything you look at, they did. They're so laser focused on giving. The saying is throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? They're so laser focused on getting rid of us. They don't care if they burn down the house doing it. So everything they did was give them a free bond. Oh, you know what? That's not working. Then we'll put ankle monitors on them so that they don't have to use a bondsman. Well, who monitors them at night when the criminal justice system shuts down at 5:00?
Exactly.
They go home.
Very valid.
Punch a clock. Right. We do it after hours.
Okay, so we're coming close to the end of the show. What I really want to focus on is talk to me a lot more about your nonprofit called Take Back Our City. What are your goals? How can people donate to that? How can people get involved in helping you with your organization? What does that organization do specifically? And then how can people help you and reach out to you?
So specifically, I created it myself the paperwork as a nonprofit because I was upset about how victims were being ignored. When their loved one was murdered, and yet defendants were being treated, their rights were more important than the families of the victims. So it was to bring awareness. While you can go into courtrooms and the bailiffs can, everybody has to be quiet and you can't with outbursts and things. So my goal was to bring their stories, learn each victim, their stories, take it to the public to say that this could be you. Bail reform could land on your doorstep. Because unfortunately, for a lot of the parents, they didn't care until it happened to them.
Well, I think if your parent goes through and doesn't think it's going to happen to their child, to them, and all of a sudden, it's like we're seeing nowadays, it can happen to anybody. Nobody is, everybody should be aware of their surroundings.
So I advocate for them in their grief.
Have you ever spoken to Andy Kahn at the city?
I go to Crime Stoppers meetings. I've gone every month for 4 years. That's where I
That knows
told
you really well. I'd like
yeah,
to speak you to him.
yeah. No, Andy and I have collaborated. He's got me on Fox with Randy Wallace on the Breaking Bond. So, but um, Andy's got his victims, and some of them have just engaged with me. We have the same goal. Um, but Andy did make a miscalculation in the very beginning. He said to me, and I told him, he said, "You can forget about misdemeanor bail. That's a dead issue. That's not. You can forget about that." And I said, "But if you really want to reform people, that's actually where you want to change them when they're committing misdemeanors. You don't want to wait for them to graduate to felonies and then try to reform them. It's too late."
Exactly. I agree. There's got to be it's kind of like trying to help somebody who doesn't want to be helped. If they have to put a little skin in the game and it's going to cost them a little bit, they'll think twice about maybe doing it a second time when it hurts their pocket. And there's a consequence. And I think we've kind of deviated into this society of there's no consequences. Everybody's above the law. Well, no, we're not.
Well, see, I'm the being the bondsman. And because let me just give you a personal, but I've been to jail before. I've been on probation. I've, I was that person. So reform is I am what reform looks like because I was held accountable by Harris County. Mine was all misdemeanors, but that was the whole point. Did I like it? No, of course not. I hated it. But then I started to wake up and go, okay, if I have to be here, then I might as well learn something.
Yes.
And I did learn. So I'm the first person that the defendant comes in contact with that I'm able to speak with him and go, look, what's going on? What First of all, in order to be reformed, you got to own what you've done. You can't blame mama, you can't blame daddy, you can't blame Santa Claus, you can't blame school. You take accountability for what you've done. Now, once you've done that, now we can work on you're going to get better.
Exactly.
That's the way it works. There's no way around that. If you want true reform, there is no way. Not to mention, bail reform got dressed up under race. And that was dangerous because what I felt like was the community gave up on trying to reform their people. So they victimized the criminal behavior and said, it's not your fault. That's dangerous.
Well, and the other danger is the fact that, for example, when I look at ICE, for example, um, it's always well they're targeting the brown man. Well, they're not. They're going after targeted lists of people that have committed these crimes and have violations or final orders of removal. So I feel your pain in that sense with that comparison. But let me ask you to please share the name of your organization again. How can people get a hold of you, and where can they donate?
Usually they can people contact me directly. There is a website. It's just safebackourcity.net. And then they can donate on the site or they can reach out to me. I prefer to individually meet with it, whether it's a small group or whether it's the people, because I want them to understand my sincerity.
Well,
I don't
think that's wonderful. I think that's a wonderful feat.
Kim Ogg gave my nonprofit $50,000 when I got it established for the victims. And I know that, people have mixed feelings about her, but she did turn on the bail reform because when she realized they wouldn't let out felons, she realized that was a bad deal. It got sold as misdemeanors only at first. And then she realized when they started talking about letting felons out that it was not a good thing. So, um, but that's what I do. And I try to do things for them. If I can help them with, maybe getting t-shirts for their loved ones, advocating a protest, putting together one. But I'm just an advocate and I want people to know that I don't do this for me, for the attention or the adoration. It's really near and dear to my heart. I grew up here. I love this county. I hate what it's become. Um, and I feel like, and I'm very much a person that put up or shut up, put your money where your mouth is, or don't say anything at all.
I agree with you. Listen, we come to the end of the show. I want to thank our listeners. I want to thank our sponsors. I certainly want to thank you, Mario, for your insight and your commitment to making change, and you've certainly gained a friend out of me. But I want to thank you for this time today. And ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of Frontline Facts. I am your host, Louisa Deason. Until next time, we'll see you again.